desperately need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is Buffalo What's Next. I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Dave Debo.
And I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
After May 14th, how can we afford not to talk about race?
About education, about segregation, about humanity.
Since the dawn of this nation, racial violence has existed.
The way we have designed our society has a big hand in what occurred in that Tops Market.
The suburban area, everywhere. We must work and teach our children.
We need to make sure that we put more funding in our programs that help prevent gun violence and more money into art.
If we're going to have some real healing, we've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truths.
And good morning. This is Dave Debo. On the program today, Jason Corwin will be with us. He's a Seneca. He's also a professor in the Department of Indigenous Studies at UB. Interesting discussion there because for a long time, the Indigenous Studies Department was kind of an adjunct of American Studies. Now it's even a greater priority at UB. He's not just going to talk about UB, though. There are a lot of issues to raise there with Jay Moran. That comes your way in about half an hour. But first, Jeff Kelly is with us from Investigative Post. Jeff has been writing an awful lot lately about racism and use of the N-word in the Buffalo Police Department. So we're going to look at a couple of his articles. We're going to get a recap on some of those stories. They've been out for a while, but the story is also evolving and developing in a way that I think makes sense to have Jeff here today. Thanks for being here.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Dave.
Let's look at your Twitter feed this morning already. The very top of the feed at GH Kelly 1969. That's your Twitter. You have a news story this morning.
Guess how old I am, Dave.
Were you born maybe in 69?
There you go.
You have a story that just came out this morning on your Twitter feed that is kind of a follow-up to the other reporting that we wanted to bring you out here for. Councilman recalls racism as a cop. Explain the latest.
Yeah, so this article is based on a conversation I had with Councilman David Rivera, who served 25 years with the Buffalo Police Department and is chair of the Council's Police Oversight Committee. We had this conversation a couple years back, although we reiterated it a bit yesterday. It was a conversation about police budgets and about 911 response times. And then at the end of the conversation, he talked about his experiences as a young cop. He came on the force in 1982. And he described, he was talking about his frustration with the fact that somehow, despite all the screening mechanisms that are in place for young recruits, somehow bad cops seem to get on the force. Most cops, he says, are good cops, but these bad cops get through. How is it? Is it that they somehow fool these psychological tests and background checks and interviews with relatives and friends? Or do they confront a culture when they get there and choose, or maybe not choose, but assimilate to that culture? And so he described that culture to me and the racist language he heard, the mistreatment of a partner of his first partner, who got in a fight in a station house on the west side when someone called him a name. So Councilman Rivera described that his experience and his frustration with it. And so that's what today's story is about. And it's a response kind of to the articles we've published the last couple of weeks, which are based on court documents.
We will absolutely get there to the more recent reporting. But Rivera remembered that in 89, the culture of the police force was...
Earlier than that. 82, 83 is when he came on. But he's describing it throughout his career, as an officer. He does say that in many ways the department's culture has changed.
That's where I was going to go.
Yeah.
He described it back then as, can we say racist?
Or at least it countenanced racism.
Enabling racism.
Yeah, it was not uncommon to experience it, to see it, to hear it. He said, he said he never saw anybody do anything wrong. He just heard the language and the attitude, the dismissiveness, not just among fellow officers, but towards members of the community.
All right, so here's the argument. Negative reporter digging up something from the late 80s and trying to say that what was existing back then is still a problem now. You're just dredging up old stuff, Jeff. Explain how the comments of David Rivera are relevant today in light of the other reporting that you've been doing?
Yeah, well, that's the thing. So I had this conversation with Dave Rivera 2 years ago, and it sat because it wasn't relevant to my reporting then, but it was relevant to the reporting I've done the last couple of weeks. First, we published a story about depositions given in a lawsuit, which is an ongoing lawsuit. It's 4 years in, filed in 2018 by Black Love Resists in the Rust against the City of Buffalo and the Buffalo Police Department, alleging racially discriminatory policing practices and unconstitutional policing practices. The lawsuit arises largely from the now discontinued checkpoints program, traffic checkpoints, which were largely placed on the east side, and the behavior of the tactics of the now disbanded housing and strike force units of the Buffalo Police Department.
My understanding of that lawsuit is that they said the checkpoints themselves, because they are concentrated on the east side, are racially targeted.
Yeah, exactly.
So the purpose of the lawsuit was not necessarily to look at the culture of the police. It was specifically to look at this practice. But along the way.
But here's the thing: the lawsuit, in fact, alleges continuing practices that are racially discriminatory, not just the checkpoints program, but sort of across the board in Buffalo Police. So it is instigated by a particular program.
And I don't mean this in any pejorative or detrimental way, but a tactic. Let's place these traffic stops in the places where we think we're going to get guns. A tactic.
Yeah.
You're saying beyond that, there's also some cultural issues.
Yeah, and so in the course of this, as I say, this lawsuit is 4 years old. It is sort of
percolated through the courts for a while.
Working through the courts, and they're in the process of doing depositions and discovery. They have been for a while, and this is a long way of getting around to say I got a copy of these depositions, and which were done with command officers who were with these strike force and housing units that did most of these checkpoints, and again have since been disbanded because they were considered sort of rogue. They were causing a lot of trouble. They were instigating a lot of lawsuits and complaints. So in one of them, a retired lieutenant, Thomas Whalen, retired in 2018, talks about frequent use of the N-word and other racist language by Buffalo cops, by himself. He says he used it, and he said, this is maybe perhaps a little bit unbelievable, that nearly every officer in the Buffalo Police Department had used it at one point or another. That strains credulity. That is unlikely.
You think that is an overstatement?
No, but nonetheless, you have a Buffalo police officer testifying to a culture in which the use of this word was not uncommon. He may be exaggerating how often he heard it and from how many officers, but he's saying he used it, and he's saying that under oath. There are also depositions with other officers talking about, not quite so specifically about the use of racist language, but about the culture of discipline and the lack of oversight, the lack of training about such issues.
Did he explain, not that he needs to explain it away, but did he explain the roots of the use of that word, or the culture that flows from it? Okay, yeah, they toss the word around, but did he say anything in the deposition to the effect of, oh yeah, not only did we toss the word around, but we basically do not respect black people? Or was there an elaboration there other than just, yeah, I use the N-word from time to time?
I will say that when Whalen said he used this language, he said that was a failure on his part. He'd lost his temper. But then he said, better to lose my temper and give someone...
Than to take out my nightstick
than
or
to take out
something.
my nightstick and give someone a beating, or to arrest them and introduce them to the criminal justice system. That better a good tongue lashing is what he said. Now,
without any realization at the time how inappropriate that is.
He said, Yes.
Or at the time, I guess,
I use the word, I'm human.
caught up
he
in the
said.
moment,
Yeah.
he says.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. So he says he's not proud of it, but that it is a fact. So that was the first story.
All right. Now, let's stay on the first one before we move to number two. This was a deposition in a court proceeding about those checkpoints.
Right.
Let's stop for a moment and just make sure we're clear. Does a deposition have the force of sworn testimony? He
Yes.
pretty much put the hand on the Bible and said this is true before he said this.
Yeah, it's
Okay.
it's sworn testimony, and he's a police officer, was for many years. He knows what sworn testimony means. He's done it in court lots of times.
All right.
And that's true of the other officers who gave depositions in this case, including former Commissioner Durenda, a couple of captains who are associated with Housing and Strike Force. Depositions upcoming in this lawsuit include Mayor Byron Brown and current Commissioner Joseph Gramaglia, among others. So it's as a reporter, this lawsuit is kind of a trove because it is providing a window onto the operations and the culture of the police department.
All right, but that's the part I want to ask you about.
Yeah.
Devil's advocate here, because I can hear the antenna going up in City Hall saying, again, but they didn't look at this or that or the other thing. So for the sake of discussion, can we assume that whoever was gathering the deposition led them down a road? We're here to talk about checkpoints, but as long as you're here, I'm going to ask you about racism in the department. Is there anything in that process that could discount his admission?
Well, the way...
I mean, I can picture myself on the stand. Again, devil's advocate here. I could picture myself on the stand saying all sorts of things that a really good attorney got me to say without me necessarily wanting to say it.
Well, remember that former Commissioner Durenda, retired Lieutenant Tommy Whalen, who gave this testimony, they're sitting with an attorney. There's an attorney sitting right next to them. And the way depositions work is you pretty much have to answer any question.
Right.
And they take a long time. Whalen's took 2 days.
Yeah.
You sit for hours and hours answering a broad array of questions, beginning with who are you and what's your professional history and what was your training. You have to sort of go through a lot in these depositions. They're pretty wide ranging.
Because they are not the court proceeding. They're the investigatory side. They're really gathering as much information as they can to figure out what it is they need to use as part of the trial.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
So they're going to be deeper.
They're going to be deeper.
And they are, we said, already sworn. The part that I'm glad you said, though, is he had an attorney at his elbow.
That's right.
It's not like he...
An attorney representing the city.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not like he was led down a path. It's not like the process enabled him or tricked him.
Yeah. No, not at all. It's all fairly straightforward, and you can see in the article I published on that particular on the depositions, there are links to the depositions if your listeners are curious and have the stamina to read them,
wade through
the hundreds and hundreds of pages. In fact, more than 1,000 pages of testimony from these various officers. You'll see it's a pretty relatively straightforward back and forth between the attorney for the plaintiffs and these officers.
All right. And to what degree? He said, okay, I've used the N-word. Lieutenant Thomas Whalen, former supervisor, the Strike Force unit, says, I've used the N-word. To what degree did he then say, and so do we all, the rest of the force?
He went ahead and said probably every officer. Now, again...
That's where I wanted to go. You mentioned earlier that you thought that was not necessarily credible because he spoke in such a broad way.
That's right.
Okay.
Anytime anybody says everybody or nobody, as a journalist, I think this
you discounted immediately.
This can't be true. This is the curve breaker.
Yep.
So I'm more
similarly. This is the largest, the biggest, the best.
Right.
You automatically kind of discount that and say, "Oh, really? Okay."
Right.
Yeah.
So as a journalist, as a reader of these documents, I'm interested in Whalen's admission about himself and what caused him to say, "Well, everybody does this." It means there's more than one. It's more than just him.
And go there. How did he back that up?
Yeah.
What kind of What evidence did he present saying, hey, it's not just me, man?
Yeah, and what's interesting to me, and this applies to the other story that we'll discuss too, is that this is a Buffalo police officer talking about it in what amounts to a public document. A court filing is a public document. These sorts of complaints are lodged not infrequently by members of the community who have encounters with police that have rubbed them the wrong way. Sometimes the accusations are genuine and true, and sometimes people are just angry and they make things up. That, we have to allow for that. But this comes from a cop, and a retired cop, but a cop nonetheless, and that is very rare.
When did he retire? Is there any way we can argue, that was the way it was, but it's not that way now?
2018.
Okay.
Yeah, he retired in 2018, not long after Strike Force and the housing unit were
disbanded.
I don't know, but I have no reason to believe that's the cause for his retirement. He had put in plenty of years. It was maybe just time.
All right. Now, another thing that the deposition does address, though, is not just his use of the N-word, but it also talks about supervision and lack of discipline and those kind of issues. Talk to me a little bit about what you uncovered there.
Yeah. So in here now we're talking about more than just Whalen's deposition. They're the depositions of various captains and lieutenants who served in housing and strike force, and they all seemed to they all painted a picture of, particularly of strike force as a unit with not a great deal of supervision. They kind of called its own shots. Where there was very little training certainly about bias or constitutionality of stops, which you would think would be important given that these two units were the primary operators of these checkpoints. Maybe some initial training a day, an afternoon in the academy, perhaps some refresher training here and there, but nothing extensive, nothing constantly renewed. And also very, very little official discipline for misbehavior. Perhaps, Whalen and others, Captain Serafini, various others, sort of discuss how discipline is handled within the unit between a commanding officer and an alleged offender, alleged offending officer, but not so much through what in fact are the required procedures.
All right. Jeff Kelly is with us from Investigative Post. He's written a series of articles lately. The latest one on his Twitter feed is about allegations that go back to the 80s. Councilman recalls racism as a cop. The bigger bombshells, we just uncovered one of them, Buffalo cops' use of N-word, not uncommon. Lieutenant Thomas Whalen, a supervisor in the strike force unit, in a deposition in a court case that is pending, basically said, oh, yeah, I've used it, and a lot of others have too. We're going to talk more about that and another log on the fire, Jeff's recent reporting. Also, this headline, lawsuit says police captain went on racist rant. So there's even more to look at when we return. This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO.
Not sure what you want to watch tonight? We've got you covered. Visit WNED.org/TV schedule to see what's on WNED PBS, WNED Create, and WNED PBS Kids. Click the Primetime button to see what's on tonight. You can also search for your favorite programs in the search bar or look for programs by date and time. Visit WNED.org/TV schedule and start making your viewing plans now.
There are a lot of great ways to spend $8 a month and get a blue check mark. So why not become a member of WBFO, your NPR station? You'll be a verified member on the spot, and your money will support high-quality news and information. For fun, we'll send you a snazzy window cling and a travel mug, both with our logo and the blue check mark that shows everyone you're a verified member of WBFO. Just call 1-877-456-8870 or go to WBFO.org to make your pledge. Thank you.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And this is Dave Debo. Jeff Kelly is with us for about another 10 minutes or so. We're talking about his recent reporting for Investigative Post that talks about racist culture in the Buffalo Police Department. We touched on an article that looked at the deposition in a court case where one particular officer said he used the N-word and it was common amongst a lot of his colleagues. Now let's look at another shoe to drop. This article, November 22nd, lawsuit says police captain went on racist rant. This is a separate lawsuit, correct?
Yeah, so let me walk you back. So we filed this story about these depositions on a Monday, and the Buffalo News followed suit. They reported off of our reporting, and then got some reaction from the commissioner and the mayor, who said raised many of the same points you did in our previous conversation, that this was. This is one guy's testimony. This is not about the culture, and we do not tolerate this sort of that is not the culture of the Buffalo Police Department. And then, just 3 days later, this federal lawsuit is filed. I had gotten a copy of it a few days before it was filed, and basically what it alleges is that
2 black officers at a mental health clinician say that their supervisor made all sorts of outrageous and derogatory remarks at a particular meeting and kept it up, and there, too, was using the N-word pretty indiscriminately.
And this meeting was in May, and the officers who were present, who witnessed this what they call a racist rant, filed a complaint with Internal Affairs, which is the proper procedure. When in the Buffalo Police Department, if there is a issue involving racial discrimination, that complaint is meant to go directly to Internal Affairs, not to your supervising officer, particularly if the supervising officer
may be involved in
the alleged
behavior.
Offender.
Right. Okay.
So,
and that is the case here. The officer we're talking about is Captain Amber Beyer, who oversees the department's behavioral health team.
Right. Which is interesting, right?
Because so they work for her.
They
allege that she was the one that had the racist rant, and they take it to Internal Affairs, and it dies there, so they end up in federal court?
We don't know that it dies there.
Okay, yeah, because those are private. Okay.
And in fact, when this story was published, the response from the commissioner and the mayor was that an Internal Affairs investigation continues. Well,
okay.
It's been 7 months. Let's just point that out. And the people who need to be interviewed to determine the truth of it, they all work right there for the Buffalo Police Department. They're not hard to find. Frequently, Internal Affairs investigations into complaints are stymied by police investigators' professed inability to interview the complainants. In this case, they work for the department.
Okay.
And so it's not clear why it's taken 7 months to reach a conclusion. Maybe now that the story has come out, it will reach a conclusion more quickly.
Give me the context that led up to this racist rant. So, officer walks in and shows her a viral video?
Yeah, a video that had gone viral at the time that shows, and this is in a different jurisdiction, 2 white officers pulling over a black driver. The black driver, as it turns out, is a cop in uniform. The video made the rounds as evidence as an example, an illustration of racial profiling by white police
in another city,
officers.
But in general,
that's right.
Something that someone was putting out there to say cops have an issue.
Back this spring, that video was making the rounds. So an officer brought it in and showed it to Captain Beyer and some others in the office. Of the behavioral health team at police headquarters.
And it sparked an in-office discussion.
It did. Captain Beyer, according to the lawsuit, allegedly said that she could see both sides of the situation. She got pushback from a black officer who said, no, this is racial profiling. That's why we're looking at it. This prompted allegedly, according to the lawsuit, a lengthy, about 20-minute monologue from Captain Beyer that those present found racially offensive, and was the subject of continuing conversation after she'd left, at which point one of the officers apparently said, "Well, that was awkward." And eventually, within days, they filed their complaint with Internal Affairs, alleging this racist language in the workplace.
And in their complaint, or in their lawsuit, because again, the complaint with Internal Affairs is still internal, but in the federal lawsuit, how do they describe it other than as a racist rant? Was the N-word part of that?
They don't say that in that initial conversation that she used the N-word. However, in the months that followed, she was allegedly upset by their complaint to Internal Affairs and by the investigation that was opened as a result. And she pressured them and questioned them and harassed them, allegedly, about their decision to file this complaint. And at one point, I believe it was in September, so just a couple of months ago, the complaint says that Beyer came into the office, printed out a Facebook post from a Buffalo resident who the team believed suffered from mental issues and perhaps needed a visit, and she read it aloud. That post made frequent use of the N-word, and every time she
posted, though, that's not her words, but she is reading the post that includes it.
And
okay.
And according to the complaint, every time she came to the N-word, she emphasized it. And when she was asked to stop, she said, "I'm just reading the post."
Okay. What has the city's response been?
The city's response has been, "We're aware of the complaint, and the Internal Affairs investigation continues."
So they have not publicly pushed back against it, but they're saying they can't because it's under investigation.
Yeah, and now it's also now they are also party to a lawsuit. Litigation, which is always, as you know, a convenient excuse not to answer questions about a subject.
Whether valid or not. I mean, it may well be that they can't talk.
No, I laugh, but it
is used sometimes.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Tell me what happens next in both of these cases. Number one, Thomas Whalen, the supervisor that said the N-word is not uncommon. That particular lawsuit is moving ahead slowly. It's still in the deposition phase. When will we see more from that?
Soon. So it is. What I understand is that the plaintiffs in that case have a few more depositions to do, including the mayor and the current commissioner, Joe Gramaglia. They are moving forward with other discovery, and it's a vast lawsuit.
It's huge. Yeah.
It's huge, and they have requested and received troves of emails and documents and schedules and police reports, all kinds of minutia. So that is moving forward slowly. It's been 4 years. I imagine it'll be
maybe not another 4, but you don't picture it
sometime.
Soon. Okay.
And as far as the lawsuits alleging this behavior by Captain Amber Beyer, that is brand new. So that, and again, it's a federal lawsuit. Federal lawsuits move slowly.
Federal civil lawsuit, right?
Yeah. So that'll take a while.
All right.
Yeah.
And along the way, though, we do expect. Yeah, you said the mayor will be deposed, the police commissioner will be deposed. There's more stuff that's going to peel back the curtain and look inside the department with that particular lawsuit. Now, the other one, the lawsuit over the complaint on the racist rant with Captain Amber Beyer. Where does that one stand?
So
again, civil and federal, so it's going to move slowly, do we assume?
Yeah, I imagine it will move relatively slowly unless the city chooses to settle the case, which they typically do not choose to do from the outset. They will probably try to get it dismissed. That it seems to be not just the city's tactic. Almost any defendant's tactic is to try to find a reason not to argue the lawsuit at all.
Okay.
But I imagine that will take a while unless the city chooses to simply settle it.
All right. Now, as we summarize here, what is your takeaway? And I know reporters don't have opinions, but you do have insight, you do have context. Do these two lawsuits taken together indicate a cause for concern?
Yes, absolutely. I think that the most generous interpretation of these revelations is there are corners of the department in which this culture persists, very much as David Rivera told me when we discussed this conversation yesterday, this conversation we'd had a couple of years ago about his experience. He said to me, listen, again, that was the old culture, he said he was describing, and we've made great progress, but there's a lot more progress to be made.
There are dark corners here that need to be investigated.
Right, and
Gotcha.
and the remnants of that culture must not be tolerated.
All right. Jeff Kelly with Investigative Post. What's your website?
investigativepost.org.
Very good.
Come often.
And the Twitter we mentioned at the top, too, is at GHKelly1969. His latest article is there. The other two we spoke of are at investigativepost.org. Jeff, thanks for coming on in.
It's my pleasure. Thank you, Dave.
Coming up next, Jason Corwin, clinical assistant professor at UB's Indigenous Studies Department. He'll be with Jay Moran in an interesting discussion on tap there. Stay with us. This is Buffalo What's Next on WBFO.
Check out the Our Town series produced by WNED PBS, but captured by community members on the Buffalo Toronto Public Media YouTube channel.
Ellicottville is a town of variety, not only in what they have to offer, but the people.
The Burlington community is becoming increasingly multicultural, and the library is reflecting that.
Parks and playgrounds have been what makes the town of Tonawanda a great place to grow up.
The series began in 2003, but it's making its debut on YouTube now. Although some of the businesses and people may have changed over the years, the spirit of these wonderful towns remain the same.
We just didn't realize what we had in our own backyard.
We need the next generation to protect it and carry on.
Learn about Jamestown, Burlington, Welland, East Aurora, and more than a dozen other beautiful communities in our region by watching the Our Town series now on YouTube.
I would live there.
This is Buffalo What's Next, where we have conversations with the community about moving forward. To have your voice heard, press the Talk to Us button on the WBFO app, and we'll work to get your questions and comments on the air. Join us on Twitter at WBFO or email us at news@wbfo.org. Together, we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
And good morning. Welcome back to Buffalo What's Next. My name is Jay Moran. Very pleased to be joined by Dr. Jason Corwin from the University of Buffalo and their Indigenous Studies program. Thanks for joining us, Dr. Corwin.
Hey, thank you. Good morning.
Glad
to be here.
Yeah, I know. I'm thrilled to talk to you, and there's a lot of things to talk about for sure. Not the least of which, though, is the fact that UB has committed to this Indigenous Studies Department. It builds on a legacy, some history inside the American Studies Department, but the university decided to set aside its own department about this. I mean, talk a little bit about the background there.
Yeah, well, there's a long history since the 70s with such luminaries that people may know about, like Oren Lyons and John Mohawk and Barry White, both of whom were from the Cattaraugus territory, and really carved out a space for Indigenous studies at the request of the Native students who were there in the 70s. And, of course, that was a time when more people were getting active about diversifying the histories and the types of studies that were happening at universities. So fast forward to the present, and there was tremendous work done by Dr. Teresa McCarthy, who's a professor at UB. She's Onondaga from Six Nations Reserve in Ontario. And she worked with others at the university to get a grant to provide the seed funding. But UB had to agree to continue to help the process along after that initial 5-year period of funding from the Mellon Foundation. So it is a significant commitment on the university's part, and it's just been a great opportunity for a lot of collaborations within the university and with the larger community.
When you mentioned Dr. McCarthy, I've forgotten to mention also when you started, because this is part of your bio, that you're Seneca Nation, Deer Clan.
Yeah. And prior to coming to UB, I served for 6 years as the founding director of the Seneca Media and Communications Center, where I was very fortunate to have a tremendous team of very talented Indigenous creatives, and we were doing everything from photography to videography, web design, graphic design. We had a commercial radio station, WGWE, for many years, and so we had a very robust media presence that continues on.
And I think I saw a comment by you about the idea that, and you connected for a certain way, digital media, the production of digital media with the traditional storytelling of Indigenous peoples. Expand on that.
Yeah, well, I think that all human beings, storytelling is our basic way of knowing and understanding the world. And it's, particularly recognized and appreciated within Indigenous cultures. But, all day long we tell each other stories about our experiences. And they're very powerful ways of communicating information and allowing learning to take place. So a lot of times people in the environmental education field are looking at this new digital media landscape as being something that takes people away from time spent in nature. We hear people talk about things like nature deficit disorder.
Sure.
And young people just growing up completely plugged into their devices.
Right.
And so at one point I had the thought, well, what if we use these devices to get people more interested in nature and get them outdoors and engaging with the natural world and engaging with environmental issues?
And it's interesting because you engaged in, this is your prior to your work at the University of Buffalo, but you engaged in I just think this is fascinating, which you worked with some students, these are younger students, on teaching them organic Three Sisters gardening. And you, again, digital media played a part in this, didn't it?
Yeah, so this was a project that I worked on in 2014 with the Cattaraugus Territory Early Childhood Learning Center and the fantastic staff there. I worked with the After School 3 program, which was the older students, about 9 to 11, 12 age group, and enlisted the help of a good friend, Richard Big Kettle, and who's well known in the community for farming as well as a lot of artistic creations. He's a lacrosse stick maker, snow snake maker, just a tremendous artisan and a wealth of knowledge around farming. So we got this project going behind the Early Childhood Learning Center in the field there, and a lot of people pulled together, did what was necessary for us to provide the space and the opportunity for the students to get hands-on with traditional Three Sisters, corn, beans, and squash gardening, but also documenting the process from start to finish, and created about a 15-minute video, and we showed it on a loop at the art show at the Seneca Nation Fall Festival. And that was actually what led to me becoming the director of media and communications, because there was interest in developing a media department for the Seneca Nation to serve the other departments as well as to serve the governmental needs of the nation. And at that point, I was already about, I think, like 20 some years into working in the media field.
Sure. And I also have to mention, of course, you like a couple of us around here, have an old connection to terrestrial radio as well. So we welcome the kindred spirit in that regard here, Dr. Corwin. Interested to find, or maybe just to explore just a little bit more, though, that digital media part, that helping to document this project with these young people. Did that spur their interest? Do you think it added to their interest in understanding gardening, understanding the natural world?
I think so, because it's something that's very familiar to young people. They're what people are calling digital natives nowadays. I look at my young nephew, and he's able to pick up the nuances and details of these devices so quickly. I mean, everybody sees that. You look at people and they, calling on their grandkids to, hey, come help me set up my smartphone.
Right. Yes, of course.
And so it was always my thought that why don't we use these tools to get people interested and engaged with the natural world? Like, let's not forget about that which provides our sustenance. I mean, we get our entire survival from even everything here, all these plastic pieces of the various pieces of equipment in the studio, all the metals and minerals that make up these various things. It all comes from the earth, but we get very detached from it, and digital media, too much television watching, screen time certainly detracts from that. But there's still a great interest, I think, in the outdoors and the environment and in some communities. And so kind of fostering a bridge between the folks who might be more tech inclined and the folks who are a little more outdoors inclined, and saying, we can have both. It's not an either or.
And, obviously working with the young people, I mean, it's an inspiring kind of vision to see them taking such a part in this, not only the natural part, but documenting it as well and doing their own production. But your work has also extended well beyond that, in the sense that you've taken on some pretty important project, difficult, touchy community projects in Coudersport, Pennsylvania. There was, if I'm not mistaken, a project that was going to build a water treatment plant that was going to help to utilize, or I guess take the disposal water from our wastewater from fracking,
yes,
and then put it into the Allegheny River.
Yeah, and when you know the history of how the Allegheny River has been impacted by the Kinswood Dam, I mean, there's been documentaries left and right, The Lake of Betrayal in particular, a recent PBS production, detailing that story. There's already a history of not only ancient history connection to these waterways, but a recent history of the waters being impacted and the community being very negatively and traumatically impacted. So when word gets out that there's plans to put fracking wastewater into the headwaters of the river, it set off, all kinds of alarms for people in the community. And so I was fortunate to work with a lot of community members, a lot of people within the Seneca Nation. We have tremendous environmental professionals, our conservation, fish and wildlife department, environmental protection departments, council and executives. Everybody was on the same page about, we didn't want to see this project happen. It was too risky. There's too many contaminants, and there was not a clear sense from this company, Epiphany Allegheny, that was proposing this, that their technology would adequately remediate and remove these substances. So we collaborated with a tremendous amount of non-native folks from Coudersport and from the general area. They would show up at the Allegheny territory to our weekly meetings in large numbers, and we worked together to put a halt to that project, thankfully.
It's an amazing story when you look at it that way. I mean, you can understand that there might be a certain portion of the non-native population, people in Coudersport, who would have an environmental interest. But at the same time, we see it all the time, right? Business, industry needs to thrive, needs to grow. There's always that element there. But when you came in, you found allies and were able to kind of coalesce and find a way to bring a stop to this.
Yeah, and it was very humbling to see just how appreciative the folks in Coudersport, who had been sounding an alarm locally, but had been getting kind of poo-pooed, like, oh, you're just, worrying too much. It's not going to be that big a deal.
So it looked like this was going to take place. This was going to happen if this type of activism didn't generate.
Well, basically, what happened, what alerted myself and some other folks in the Seneca Nation about it, was there was an editorial put out by a group called Public Herald, which is a nonprofit investigative journalism outfit based in Pittsburgh, though one of the key members is born and raised in Coudersport.
Okay.
And they put out a story highlighting the potential threat from this project. And we read it the day before there was going to be a public hearing about the project in Coudersport, so we scrambled.
Dr. Corn, are you insinuating that there was a well-publicized public hearing?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
So, that was the first news we had heard about. Of course, we were aware that, fracking has been going on full force in Pennsylvania, and it was starting to expand more into northern Pennsylvania. And, there's a long history of gas and oil development in western New York, the southern tier, northwestern Pennsylvania. But fracking was still mostly in other parts of Pennsylvania. It hadn't quite yet crept up into that area. But now that it was, and now there was this existential threat of water, this produced and then treated water getting put into the headwaters. And the Seneca Nation has invested significantly in restoring the fisheries and making sure that the health of the Allegheny River, what we call Ohio, the good, the beautiful river, there's been a lot invested into making it something that we're both proud of and that sustains families through fishing. It's that whole water body is recognized by the DEC as being one of the cleanest in the state. So it was too precious to allow something like that to happen.
Dr. Jason Corwin is with us here on Buffalo What's Next this morning. He is the head of the Indigenous Studies Department.
Not the head.
Oh, I'm sorry. We always got to watch that. We always got to watch that, right? We always have to know where we are on the ladder. I know that. I know that very well. But if you're with the new, relatively new, this just started 2021, 2022, the Indigenous Studies Department at the University at Buffalo. And while I'd like to talk about that a little bit more, I want to. You brought up something that I guess I didn't totally understand. You were talking about the Seneca Nation and their environmental efforts, their structure, a governmental structure that it sounds like it's in place to help focus on these issues. And you're seeing the impact of the Allegheny River. Just tell me a little bit more about that. I guess I'm almost interested in a discussion. Are there lessons that, whether it's New York State, on the federal level, that can be learned from the way the Seneca Nation handles environmental issues?
Well, of course, there's, philosophically a deep concern around sustainability and our relationship with the natural world. You could say one of our most important philosophical practices and spiritual practices, it revolves around giving thanks for the natural world. The Thanksgiving address, people call it in English.
Sure.
And so there's that. But in terms of the Seneca Nation as a modern government with various departments that are focused on particular issues and needs of the community, whether it's elders or housing or medical, drug and alcohol treatment, you name it. There's a department focused education, and so there's an environmental protection department who's very much focused on things such as brownfield remediation for things in the city of Salamanca, or any number of potential environmental threats, as well as general waste management and disposal. And we also have a conservation fish and wildlife department that's specifically focused on managing the fisheries. They run fish hatcheries on both territories that are run with clean energy and very efficient, and are for stocking the fish populations, as well as taking care of anything, animal issues, bears getting in people's trash and needing to be relocated to an area away from people, or, rabid animals, or an injured eagle, and making sure it gets to a wildlife rehab. They're out there on the ground, on the land, doing that work every day. And so many of these people are also part of working groups. Like there's a climate change working group within the nation.
Really?
There is a watershed resources working group, which I was fortunate to be a part of when I worked for the nation. So there's really a number of committed and well-trained professionals in these areas who are very diligent about ensuring protection of the environment and the natural world on our territories.
There are, of course, whether it's the Department of Environmental Conservation here in New York State or the EPA, lots of committed individuals in those departments as well.
Yeah.
But sometimes those departments and their missions can be sidetracked by politics.
Anywhere it can get sidetracked by politics.
So I guess
universities are chock full of politics too.
Seneca Nation?
Yeah, everywhere.
Okay. All right. I'm interested in going there because it does sound like an expansive effort. The Seneca Nation, of course, is the revenues, of course, that they generate from various interests are well documented to a certain extent. But it's interesting to hear that there is that level of structure in place that is focused on. It seems like it's taking the tradition of indigenous peoples and bringing it into a very practical, modern day approach to how to remedy and deal with very, very complex environmental issues.
Yeah, this is something that I explain to people often, because oftentimes in the media, we're just hearing about the casino and, conflict with the state over revenue sharing, over gaming compacts, and that's about as far as it goes. And people don't understand that, we have all these services that we're seeking to provide to our people. And that has to be done, somehow, some kind of way, and that's through the various enterprises that the nation has.
Yeah, I guess we're kind of like opening up a door to a larger conversation about, and maybe we can even go on that just a little bit. Like you said, people are surprised. People don't get, the media doesn't necessarily focus. What else is the media missing, or the general public missing, about understanding indigenous peoples at this stage of history?
Well, one is that there's a huge amount of diversity throughout the Americas, and even if we're just looking in the context of, say, the Northeast, we have different peoples with different histories, different languages, different traditions, and so a lot of times, because not much attention has been placed in the media on Native peoples or in schools, we're sort of just this out of sight, out of mind entity to most people. And it's not uncommon to hear, they're still Indian? Oh, reservations exist. And so
there's, in a lot of ways, there's just a general lack of understanding of just how things are structured, right? I mean, I think when you get right down to it, right? I mean, that's a big part of it.
So students that are at University at Buffalo that are fortunate to take our courses get to see the great depth and diversity of the Indigenous experience, of whether it's around history or linguistics, environmental justice. There's such a wide range of topics that we're teaching, and we're a rapidly growing department too.
How is the student response to this? Are you getting a good, solid enrollment? I mean, again, like you said, universities are political animals too. But yeah, how's it working?
Yeah, it's been increasing every semester, and I can speak for myself that in terms of seeing the student reviews, the anonymous student reviews at the end of the semester for the courses, a few times I've had students say, this was my favorite professor at UB. And they appreciate the passion and the commitment because we live this, we care about this kind of, the work that we do. So we have people who are in our department who are linguists, who are historians, who are media critics, media producers. It's people with anthropology backgrounds. It's quite a diverse group, and it's exciting that it's growing. We added 2 more this semester, this fall semester. We're going to be adding at least 2 more in another year. We have people that are teaching language classes, Seneca language, Tuscarora language, Mohawk is going to be offered. So it's quite a robust curriculum that we're pulling together.
Saw a review of some work that you did, and somebody was remarked about your hopefulness. And here on this show, we even have the words what next in the title of the show as well. What are the possibilities? I'm going to explore that optimism a little bit here. If there was, we're going to say when there is a greater understanding of the general American populace and native cultures, indigenous cultures, what are the possibilities? What can we hope for to come out of that?
A more sustainable and humane future that benefits all. We're at this critical crossroads as a species. Our global commons is threatened by the impacts of industry, of the various things that we consume and partake in the modern world. And so it is beyond imperative that not only in this country but around the world that there is respect and collaboration with Indigenous peoples to see that we're not some quaint relic of the past. We have very viable ideas. We have tremendous intellectual traditions, and we very much want to be partners at the table in seeking out a sustainable future for all. So my students give me a lot of hope for the future because I see them critically thinking about these things. A lot of them are here from Western New York and are local, and they are really opening their minds to get to know who their Indigenous neighbors are, and they're really desiring to know and to see, where can bridges of communication be built, where can alliances of solidarity and mutual interest take place. And, the Seneca Nation is one of the largest employers in Western New York. And, it's not always appreciated just how significant our impact is. We quite often have been vilified in the media. We're greedy or, this and that. And it's kind of ironic that, to hear these kinds of various statements over the years from different administrations come out of Albany to characterize us.
Dr. Jason Corwin, I'm going to leave that very powerful statement for the end. Thank you very much for joining us.
Yes, thank you.
This has been Buffalo What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, and WUBJ Jamestown.